Hello, this is the Lord's Legion and welcome to a brand new movie review, and as you can see this is a part of the series known as The Path to Endgame, where I'm going to be looking back on each and every film within the Marvel Cinematic Universe up until the release of Avengers Endgame. As at last we have reached to the penultimate movie within phase 3 of the MCU. The movie in question of course being Captain Marvel, in which the fanbase itself is very divided on what to expect out of this movie, whether it's going to be the next best thing within the MCU or whether it's going to be its first flop. But despite most people around, I try and keep an open mind and hope for the best for pretty much any film that comes out. But without further ado, let's begin with this review. Now I must admit that going into Captain Marvel, my expectations for this movie was relatively low. And it wasn't entirely because of the controversy surrounding the movie or even so much as Brie Larson's comments, but to me none of the trailers really got to me all that much, and honestly I was expecting this movie to be like the Ant-Man films where they're just nothing more but complete filler. But like I previously said, I was hoping for the very best for Captain Marvel, and I was hoping that this movie would surprise me. And I must say, this film actually did surprise me because I honestly do think that Captain Marvel is a very solid origin film. And while I wouldn't even put Captain Marvel in my top 10 MCU films, I still think this movie does well enough with its style and flavour that makes it stand out in comparison to something like Ant-Man. Now the main plot for Captain Marvel is relatively simple, as it is in fact an origin story. However, what makes this film stand out in comparison to most origin films is the fact that they managed to do some mindfuckery surrounding her origin. And while some of the revelations were pretty obvious from a mile away, I do appreciate the way they tackled her origin story as well as how they showed off the flashbacks and whatnot. And I do think it does fit in Carol's favour given how she does have amnesia in the film and she doesn't quite know where she came from. But along with that, she is also caught up in the middle of the Kree-Skrull War, and in that sense it does make her question where her true loyalties lie and who she truly is. Now of course whenever I talk about the actors, I have to start with the main star, of course being Brie Larson as Carol Danvers, and honestly, I'm still unsure on what her character is supposed to be. Because I don't really have a grasp on what her character is supposed to be. Because in the first act, Carol Danvers was pretty much emotionless, but at the same time she was still a novice within Star Force, but then over time, she does manage to discover herself. And granted, this isn't a bad story arc in the slightest, in fact if anything this would be perfect for Carol Danvers, but unfortunately the execution just didn't match. And truth be told, I think Brie Larson in the role is perfectly fine for the most part, although her acting does seem a bit shaky in some scenes. I don't think it was all her fault however, because I do think that the script was a bit choppy as well as the editing, so I do feel like there are some scenes that have been left out. But regardless, I still hope that we do get to see more of the character and that we do get a better sense on who she is supposed to be. Because in my eyes, Captain Marvel doesn't seem any more different in comparison to Black Widow or even Wasp. But not only that, we also get to see Samuel L. Jackson as a younger Nick Fury who, despite how some people have been saying that he does seem completely out of character, I don't mind it too much because we do know that this is a younger Nick Fury. And I would imagine Nick Fury to be somewhat of a goofball in his early days. Plus I do want to add that the aging effects within his face is very top notch and it does seem very realistic. Plus we also have Jude Law, who is one of the major standouts as Yon-Rogg. And he does bounce off of Brie Larson rather well in the sense that he is this very tough mentor for Carol Danvers. Now a lot of people do seem to praise the whole friendship between Carol and Maria, and for the life of me I don't even see why. Because honestly I don't see what the big deal about it is, and they don't particularly strike me as being best friends. And it's not Lashana Lynch's fault by any stretch, but I just feel like the whole friendship felt weightless. And speaking of disappointments, I am very disappointed in that we didn't get to see much of Phil Coulson or even Ronan the Accuser. Because I honestly did thought that they were going to go somewhere with those characters, but if you get rid of both of them in this movie, then the result of the final product would be the exact same. And to me it's very unfortunate because I really do like both of those characters. But ultimately they served next to no purpose. But by far the best character in the entire movie is of course Ben Mendelsohn's Talos, which to me is very surprising because not only does this villain have a lot of personality, but he also does have a lot of depth. And near the end of the movie, I couldn't help but root for the character. And speaking of the Skrulls, the MCU's version is a massive departure in comparison to the comics for a very specific reason. I'm not going to spoil on exactly why this is, but I do have a feeling that some die-hard fans might be a little pissed off by this revelation. But when you really think about the Skrulls in the comics, I do kinda see why the MCU took them in this new direction, and I honestly do think that this is actually fitting for the Skrulls. And also as a side note, Goose is a very charming kitty. Now to me, the special effects in this movie is very hit and miss, mainly with the stuff on the planet Hala as well as the final act. However, when the CG works in this movie, they really do look spot on. And as for the action, I do think that there are at least 2 or 3 action scenes that are pretty well done, while the final climax was very underwhelming. Because by that point, they really did want to show off on how powerful Carol Danvers really is. And by that point, there was just no tension at all. Now, like I previously said, Captain Marvel at its core is very much a Marvel Phase 1 movie, in the sense that it's an origin film that does follow the similar beats, and it does seem somewhat plain. However, to me, what makes this one stand out in comparison to most is the way they did tackle Carol's origin story, where it doesn't follow in the traditional linear structure. And it also does help in that we do have some solid villains, despite how it does seem a little oversaturated. However, what really does prevent Captain Marvel from being a really great MCU film is the fact that Captain Marvel herself just doesn't seem very well defined in my eyes. And if they have polished the character a little more and gave her her own personality, then I honestly think that Captain Marvel could have been a really great film. But unfortunately, as I stand, the final verdict for Captain Marvel, I am pretty comfortable in giving it a 7 out of 10. It is somewhat plain and it is very much a mid-tier MCU film, but honestly I had a lot more fun with Captain Marvel than I expected. So what do you think of Captain Marvel? Do you think that this is a very solid entry within the MCU, or do you think that it is pretty much bad? Comment below and share some thoughts. And as always, thank you guys for watching this video. Please like and subscribe. Take care and have a good one.